Okay, well, welcome everybody by the ISBNPA Webinar, your academic career post-PhD. And I want to welcome you on behalf of the NESI committee. We're the network of early careers and students of ISBNPA. And this day I will be here together with Sophie Kompernolen from Ghent in Belgium. And my name is Margie Poelman and I'm from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So before we start, I will make a few instructions and then Clare Collins will be with us. First of all, I think most of you already did it. It's very important to mute your audio because of all the background noises or ringing telephones or family members. If they're disturbing, it's not so nice for the other people, so please mute your audio. And if you have any questions for Claire or for everyone you want to share, please use your chat function. So the chat function is in the bottom of your screen. You see it here with the circle around it. If you click this chat function, you can send here a message. You can send the message only to Claire during her presentation, or you can send it to everyone. But it's very important to also add Sophie and myself. And because if there are too many questions, we can select questions or we can just see which questions are already answered or not. Before we start, I want to give an introduction to the speaker. Unfortunately, Professor Emily de Vet from Wageningen, she's in bed with a very bad fever, so she's not able to be here tonight with us. She's apologizing and she's hoping she's be here another time. But luckily, we still have Professor Clare Collins from Australia on this early morning. Clare Collins is Professor of Nutrition and Dietetics, and she's the Director of the Research School of Health Science of the University of Newcastle in Australia. And Professor Collins has published over 250 scientific manuscripts, and she supervised 20 higher degree candidates to competitions. So in her academic work, Professor Collins and her team are working to address society's unhealthy eating behaviors and chronic health problems. But she's not only involved in very good science, but also really try to address the society to make impact with her research. So we're very happy that Professor Collins is with us today to tell you more about post-PhD academic career track strategies. And I would like to say, Professor Clare Collins, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm just sharing my screen now.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, share screen. All right, can everyone see my slides? I assume so. So thank you for the introduction, Marcia, and the invitation to present today. This is really exciting to me. I'm also the co-director of the Priority Research Centre in Physical Activity and Nutrition, and we've met many of you at the conferences. So today I want to share with you what I think are some ways that you can ignite your passion for research, particularly being an early career researcher or a postdoctoral fellow. Just trying to move my slides on, trying to work out why they're not moving on. There we go. So you might wonder, what you're doing. Why are you here at this point in your career? I know it can be very frustrating and a very lonely time. It feels like you're the only one experiencing some of the challenges in the postdoctoral period. But be rest assured that while you might feel like you're in the dark, you absolutely are not alone. And for example, today, 23 of you are connecting from all around the world to look at how to shed some light on the path ahead, how to provide some ignition and light. So some of the reasons why I think it's worth participating in as many career development events as you can at this stage of your career, because it is a chance to hear what other people's experience is. Research, no matter what area of academia you go into or whether you go and work in the industry, it's likely you've been employed because of your research skills, and it will always be a key performance indicator. Whether you're in industry or academia, being productive and proactive in research opens doors. And the other thing is, when you're doing research, it's heaps of fun to go to conferences, present your results, and meet new people and get new connections around the world. From an industry perspective, or even a health service perspective, research helps solve a problem, for either a client or a service or an industry or the world. So my background is that I'm actually a clinical dietitian, and I did my PhD in my 30s. So when I talk to clinicians who haven't done PhDs, they still need research skills, because in their world, they're still doing quality research programs and initiatives. And by connecting with your clinical or professional colleagues, you can actually help them do what they're already doing, but in a more rigorous way. So the research skills in other areas just have different names, like quality assurance programs. And then that allows you to become a key influencer, whether it's from a clinical world, a professional world, for example, teaching, or whether you're working with local policymakers. Once you start working in that way, it helps you develop a profile and to become an expert. So now I want to share with you some ideas on how to get that initial ignition or traction from that period of time, that no man's land, when your PhD is completed. So first up, I went to the dictionary to look at what is the definition of igniting, like trying to ignite your research career. And you can see that ignite means to cause burn, to set fire to arouse the passions or excite, or to bring something about, or provoke or stir up. And all of those definitions actually fit really nicely with trying to get some traction and trying to get your research career to take off. So there they are again. So in this presentation, with that in the background, I'm just going to focus on 3 areas. How to approach research strategically, whether you're a postdoc, an early career researcher, or a mid-career researcher. How to think outside the box to grow your research, to get some new ideas, new collaborations, or new methods. And then thirdly, how to intentionally make some collaborations. And by that, I mean not just sheer chance because you happen to sit next to somebody in a conference session and got talking, but how to go to a conference or to approach someone with a thought out way of developing a collaboration with the right people, right institution, or right industry. So first up, let's just look at number 1, how to approach research strategically. Well, I think the bottom line key thing is to always focus on doing good science. Good science gets published, and that certainly is the mantra of the journal IJBNPA. And the best papers will get published. So if you do good work, even if you're not a good writer initially, you'll become a better writer and your work will get published. The other key thing is to make yourself more competitive. So that means writing papers and looking for opportunities to write papers. I think one of the challenges is when you're doing your PhD, those papers are about your PhD. When you're a postdoc, they're about the postdoc job. But even while you're a postdoc, it's likely there are opportunities to be involved in other papers. One thing that happens here in our Priority Research Centre is there are always systematic reviews going on, and the systematic review teams are always looking for a willing pair of hands, for a volunteer. So some of our postdocs have actually volunteered to help somebody out, whether it's screening of abstracts or data extraction or checking data, and being able to participate enough, and this has been in their own time, to justify authorship. So they haven't had to lead a systematic review, but they've been able to be involved in a systematic review and justify authorship. Now that's really smart, because systematic reviews get widely cited, and systematic review skills are valued in every team. The next important thing I would say is to network. And that doesn't mean you have to go to international conferences, but networking within research groups within your current institution is a really good place to start. In my field, in nutrition, that affects every chronic disease. And there are many groups where they don't have anybody with the skills or expertise around nutrition. So it may mean that you go to research meetings of a whole range of teams and buddy up with people within those teams, or even offer to give a presentation of your work in those areas. The other really key thing early in your career is not to be shy. You need to nominate and apply for awards. And many of those you won't get, but once you start applying and nominating, at least you've got your CV in a format that's needed for these awards, and you also get used to applying. Each time you go to a conference, there's usually an early career category, so ticking that and taking it deadly seriously by developing your presentation to the best possible standard and practicing before you come along. So, like it or not, you need to get awards, because when people are evaluated for postdocs, it's so competitive that can be what differentiates the successful applicant from another, when the last fellowship comes down to two equally qualified or equally productive candidates. Something to raise within your centre, for example, is whether or not your centre can actually even generate some appropriate awards. Within our Priority Research Centre, we have best paper within the themes of our PRC, and that particularly are targeting PhD candidates and postdocs. Another really important way to improve your writing is to become a peer reviewer for the journal. You might not be a member of the journal board, but volunteering to review for a journal is what will also help position you to eventually get a position on the journal board. I know here amongst the postdocs I know, there are a couple who said they were looking for more opportunities to peer review. And at this stage of your career, I actually think it is better for you to review a lot for one journal than to review one paper a year for 5 journals. So you can email Russ Jago, the editor of ISBNPA, for example, and say, this is my area of expertise. I'm particularly looking to review papers in that area, and then find yourself doing those. Another category of paper that is actually particularly hard to find reviewers for is what's called a re-review. So the paper's been reviewed, the authors have made their changes, they've resubmitted it, and for a host of reasons, the original reviewers are no longer available. Well, it can be very tricky and sensitive for editors to find somebody who essentially is like the second choice reviewer because they weren't invited the first time. But knowing that people are willing to review those types of papers can be really, really helpful. Next, write papers, cite yourself. And when I say that, I mean cite yourself appropriately, because it stands out like a sore thumb if you just, here's me and every single paper I've ever been on, and when the paper doesn't really have anything to do with those past publications. Next up, apply for grants. And whether they're internal grants, they're small, medium or large, they all go on your CV. So even if you've got a $500 equipment grant from your institution, at this stage of your career, they're all really, really important. I think another thing that can be helpful is being vigilant for opportunities. So whether they're being part of a contract or a consultancy, or whether it's an opportunity to be a tutor for an academic subject, all of those things start to add up, and you can start different sections on your CV and add those achievements in there. In terms of grants, you don't need to start with a major national competitive category, but I think it's wise to have a conversation with either your supervisor or your mentor or your colleagues in your research centre about what's an appropriate grant for you to lead and what are appropriate grants for you to be part of the team. And that's going to depend on what grant opportunities are available. Here in the Hunter, we're able to apply for some small grants within the university. We have a medical research institute that's not far away from us where we're eligible for those grants as well. And then, of course, we have our state and our national-based grants as well. And then finally, the most strategic thing is write those papers. Write, and have a writing plan and participate in writing workshops. And I think that's a really wise and important thing to do, because there's a whole methodology and skill about how to create time or prioritize time for being a good writer and getting your writing done. So when you're in that postdoc no man's land, it's still writing papers that's important. But I think once you've handed in your PhD and it's been marked, you really have to take whatever work is available, and it's perfectly fine if that's a mix of part-time positions, you know, whether it's in academia or in industry or back in the profession that you may have been in before you did your PhD. Because for your CV, it's still those papers ticking over that's going to count. And it can be, in fact, a chance to catch up on some of the papers you didn't get to write in your PhD while you've got money coming in. Usually there's some sort of transition or refocus of the theme of your research world, or a broadening of it. So you can actually use that first postdoc time to reflect on your journey so far. It's likely that your PhD was on something quite narrow and specific, and it's likely that it's not possible just to continue on. And that can be a really disappointing feeling, but at the same time, by talking with your colleagues and your mentors, they can help you see that the skills you've learned are very applicable to another area. Or it may be a time to identify that there are, in fact, some new methods you need to learn, and who are the people that you can connect with in terms of doing those things. I think it's wise to apply for everything, because you don't know what you might get. Whether it's a fellowship, an early career grant, it's a really, really important time for the networking within your professional groups, within research groups, and potential future collaborators. A useful type of grant to apply for at this stage is a travel grant. So again, looking at what organisations, what opportunities are there for travel grants so that you can get to a conference, whether it's national or international. I think another nice thing to do at this stage of your career is to think about, if there were absolutely no barriers, where would you want to get to in the long term? So taking the time to go and walk up a mountain somewhere or on top of a hill and get that broad view. And one way of thinking it is, if you're sitting up there on top of that mountain in 5 years or 10 years' time, and you were looking back down on your workplace, what would you actually be looking at? In an ideal world, you had all the funds available, all the opportunities. What would that dream scenario look like? And if you can feel that passion burning and those sparks igniting, and that makes you feel very, very excited about the future, what is it, or what would have happened to have allowed you to achieve your dream in that 5 to 10 years? And then really making a plan about how to make those particular key events ignite. And what resources would you need so that you didn't give up on that dream? So while you're sitting on top of that hill, if you can take some notes about what you need to do or try to do to get onto that path. So it may be, if in the future you're going to be an expert in some area of nutrition or physical activity or behaviour, is there a review that's missing? And work on a plan for a review, a systematic review, because systematic reviews They don't. They can be done with no money, but they need time. So you can then look at, well, who are the key people who could be part of that review? And you can invite them to be collaborators. Some will say yes, some will say no. But the idea of being involved in an international review where you don't have to lead it can be very appealing to busy people. The other thing that actually doesn't take any money is a secondary data analysis. Is there some data that never got published from your PhD or a colleague's PhD or a project that happened in your centre? See if you can get an honours student and co-supervise or supervise them and use that secondary data analysis. In my university here at Newcastle, Australia, we have honours students in our nutrition and dietetics program, and their honours is challenging because it's embedded within their degree, but it's spread out across a whole year. At the same time, the students are doing placements all over the state. So the most practical way for that to happen is if they're doing a secondary data analysis. And there are always many students keen to do it and not necessarily enough projects. So if you approach a program or a degree that might be in that situation and you have some secondary data analysis, you could co-supervise an honours project potentially with those people. Another way, if you can get a small grant at this stage of your career, is to do a pilot project. Hopefully your research centre has pilot funds, and that's another way to test out a new method or a new idea or develop a new tool. And then, of course, peer reviewing papers for journals. One thing I would say about peer review of papers, that is very important at the postdoc stage to try and develop those skills. So have a think about how much time is reasonable for you within your current job, and timetable that into your diary. So if it's half a day a month or half a day a week, how long does it take you to do one paper? And say yes to review appropriate papers. And then you know you can't say yes when all of your time slots are filled. You've booked them in. The only time personally I would still say yes if I got invited to review a paper and it was absolutely in your area. And those type of reviews you just have to make time to do because that's being strategic. Okay, so you've made it through your postdoc and now you're what's called an early career researcher. The most important thing is still to write papers. But now, hopefully, as an early career researcher, you have a small amount more surety about your position, or you have employment for a longer time period. It's still important to know where do you want to get to in the long term. It's likely at this stage that you are applying for relevant fellowships and early career grants, and knowing where you want to get to is very, very important. My first important fellowship in Australia was called a Career Development Fellowship, and it essentially is an ECR fellowship. And I applied for 5 years before I got that. And after the first 3 years, when I'd applied for the third year, they told me I just missed out. And so I figured, well, the fourth application, I'd have it in the bag. But meanwhile, in that fourth year, they changed the form. And I just did my best at, cutting and pasting and thought I only missed out by one, I've got it in the bag. And in the fourth year, my feedback was that I was not even fundable. So essentially I made a major mistake by not looking carefully at how the application had changed from year 3 to year 4 of trying. So what I did was, rather than just, throw it in again, is I looked to see on the list who was on the fellowship review team, and there was somebody who was the partner of someone I knew. So I emailed them and asked for an introduction. And then I asked this person if I could interview them about what the fellowships were really looking for. And in doing that, I realized that I was putting in an application with some nice projects in it, but I was missing out on that second point there exactly. I wasn't conveying what my leadership goals were and where I wanted to get to in the long term. So I took my own advice and went and sat on that hill and thought about what is it, where do I want to get to, what is the central theme of my work, and then I resubmitted my application with that included and finally successful. So it is really important to do that at some point. As an early career researcher, it's now really, really important for you to be networking and strategically and internationally. You might be lucky and the international leaders in your field happen to live in your country, but most likely they won't. They're certainly not likely to be at your institution. And so again, looking at how you can work with them on a review or student exchanges, or go and visit them, or if your university has international visiting fellowships, invite one of them to come to your university to give a seminar and work with your team, for a week or two. So the other thing you can do at this stage is you can actually call yourself to task even more specifically. If you're very lucky that your early career position is a fellowship, create a timeline for yourself and keep yourself on track. And this is something that I did in my first career development fellowship, and that was on the advice of my mentor at that time. So I had promised that I would do, let's say it was 5 things. So I wrote myself a timeline for the first year that said when I would have started a particular aspect of the fellowship and when my goal was to have completed it. So that included things like papers or ethics applications or, honours supervisions and so on. And then I ticked when I started it, and I ticked when I completed it. And I actually did that quite rigorously for the first 18 months. And by the end of that first 18 months, I could see I would achieve all the goals of my 4-year fellowship. So I got a bit slack. I didn't keep doing it. But the advice I was given was that if you're lucky enough to get a fellowship, it's make or break in that first 12 months. Because some people get a 4-year fellowship or a 5-year fellowship and put their feet up on the desk and go, yay, I'm on easy street. Well, in fact, it's how you start your fellowship is what will get you on the trajectory to successfully complete it. So as part of this stage of your career, I think it's very important to find a mentor, someone who can help you crystallize your ideas about, where you want to get to in the long term. But most ideally, you should find or hopefully find someone who's also a promoter. So in my role as Director of Research for the School of Health Science, my role is to promote the researchers in my school, to help find the opportunities, to help make sure we're identifying the right people for applying for fellowships and putting forward when our schools ask to nominate people for awards as well. So is there someone who's a Director of Research at your institution? And if yes, go and have a talk to them, but about a promoting types of opportunities. Also find that mentor who's interested in helping you identify what sorts of professional development you need and what opportunities you need to be successful in research. Just having a drink, that's the pause. So then the next thing is develop a profile, whether it's within, for myself, the University of Newcastle, within my profession, the Dietitians Association of Australia, ISBNPA as a society, or on Twitter. You definitely need to have a social media presence. And even if initially that's just following people. In terms of Twitter, that's something strategically we've done within our group over the last 2 years. And we started that off by running a Twitter workshop and having a practical tweetorial where everybody got signed up and we worked out who we would follow initially and how we would just, lurk there in the background before we decided how we would personally use Twitter. For your professional profile, my view, it's not the same as everyone, is to use it for your work, not for, your sporting interests or what you had for lunch, but to use it strategically to grow a professional profile. I've already mentioned applying for fellowships. You have to be shameless in nominating yourself for awards and also take it on the chin when you don't get them. Sometimes it's about applying for things so people look at your CV. You can apply for things knowing full well that you won't get it, but at least the people who've evaluated it have looked at your CV. And that's especially within your institution. So if as an early career researcher, you're in the same institution or a new institution, you want to break out of that view of you as the previous PhD student. So you need to apply for things, sometimes just with the view of that people are going to have to look at the papers you're writing, the grants you're getting, etc. And then the peer review at this stage needs to extend to not just journal papers, but also grants, and you want to get to be a journal board member. So the difference between with a journal is you have the editor, associate editors, and then there's usually a long list on the website of board members. Now, board members, they've usually agreed to review at least 4 to 5 papers a year for that journal. And board members go on to become associate editors. So as a mid-career researcher, this is now where you're developing and mentoring your own team. So there will be a little bit of crossover if you're between an ECR and an MCR. You can still develop and mentor a small team. You want to now become a co-senior writer, and you're helping other people's write papers. So your honours students, your research higher degree candidates. You want to move to leading grant applications and applying for bigger grants. You want to move from being a co-supervisor to being a primary supervisor of higher degree research candidates. And again, for that, it depends on the rules in your institution. My university have a rule that you can't be a primary supervisor until you've co-supervised at least one candidate to completion. Meet with your mentor and or promoter. Keep applying and nominating for awards. That just goes on lifelong. Keep developing your profile. Hopefully that leads to some invitations, and then keep applying for the relevant fellowships and grants. Networking, again, stays really important, and hopefully you're getting to some international conferences. But I think at this stage, it can be helpful to climb back up that mountain and sit on the top of it again to retake your bearings, because it's likely that your focus has shifted a little bit and you need to check your coordinates, because it might be that new methods or new areas have actually developed from when you set those first goals, and that in fact there's some new area that's even emerging that you want to make sure you've carved off some time to work on. Hopefully at the mid-career research stage, someone has mentioned to you that it's really good if you can work towards becoming an associate editor on a journal. Nobody ever told me that. And the first time I found out that I should have been working towards that was a few years ago when I didn't get something in particular. And one of the comments was I would have expected to see some associate editorships. And I think I was already on a board, but I didn't realize that. So it didn't take long once I started looking around to see what the opportunities were for becoming an associate editor. So I think the path is be a peer reviewer, do a lot for a journal, try to get on a board, and then from there try to get on associate editor, but always looking out for a call. And there's a new call coming up for ISBNPA in the new year, so look out for that. So no matter whether you're a postdoc, an early career researcher, or a mid-career researcher, the same kind of strategies apply. As the postdoc, you need a bit of a break and a breather and time to celebrate that you've finished your PhD and get that backlog of papers published. You need to take whatever work you can, or that mix of part-time positions, or go back and have a breather in your clinical world or your professional world. And it's a chance to restore your self-esteem essentially, because we all know that by the time you get through your PhD, you're pretty sure you don't know anything other than is in the contents of your thesis. Go to conferences, networks, write papers. As an early career research, it's writing the papers, applying for the awards and the slightly bigger grants, and watching out for opportunities. once you get to be a mid-career researcher, paying it forward, helping other people with writing papers, applying for awards and getting those other grants. So now part 2, thinking about what can you do that's a bit out of the box? Because we've all heard the saying that if you keep doing the same thing and expecting a different results, that's the definition of insanity. So what are some of those things you can do to try and get a bit of a jump start? So one of the things that approaches I've taken is that I definitely do have a solid research focus in terms of interventions and strategies to improve nutrition, to help people improve their health at key life stages or chronic disease earliers. But over the years, I've definitely said yes to a few out-of-the-box things or taken a risk. So if 80% of what you do is focusing on that solid, sound stuff that's going to generate the papers, help get the grants, say yes if a strategic thing comes up that's really exciting. It might be slightly out of the box, but it definitely fits with that long-term career vision that you have. You only have a finite amount of time. So if you say yes, what that means is that you will have to drop something out in order to take that new work on. Because once you've used up all your time, you'll go mad if you try and do too much. Something that's out of the box if you've got no money is a survey, a systematic review, or a secondary data analysis. Something else that's out of the box and is about taking a risk. Is there a need for a novel approach in your area or a new method that you could lead, a new questionnaire or a new tool? Perhaps you can collaborate with an industry partner who would benefit from the skills and knowledge, or a non-government organisation like a Heart Foundation or a Diabetes Society or a Cancer Society. And you can also do some contract work for government or industry. Some of the non-government organisations like Heart Foundation and Diabetes Australia, sometimes they are looking for systematic reviews. So trawl through their websites or talk to someone there and talk to the grants officer at your institution for some more information. So this is just an out-of-the-box one from my experience. So I read this paper by Ross Whitehead and David Perrett at St Andrews University in Scotland, and it was called "You Are What You Eat: Within Subject Increases in Fruit and Vegetable Consumption Confer Beneficial Skin Colour Changes." And that was like that spark went off for me when I read that paper. So I contacted them and we began a collaboration. It meant our team had to have new equipment. We learnt new methods and new ideas. I applied for 2 sequential visiting fellow grants that brought Ross Whitehead, who was a postdoc, very lucky him, to come and visit our university and help set up that method. We actually worked with them to develop some refinements so that we would have standardised methods between our 2 universities. That led to a PhD student, Dr. Christine Pesdirk, who's now finished her PhD, and they're the 3 publications arising from it. And very excitingly for Christine, that actually led to an invited conference presentation in Paris. So that's where some of those, out-of-the-box things come from, sometimes something that you've read. Now let's talk about the last area to cover, which is intentional collaborations, how to make and maintain those. So one of the interesting ways of doing that is by asking them to mark a PhD thesis. And this was one way that I came to collaborate with Jean Harvey-Barino, who was one of the first people doing web-based nutrition interventions and weight loss interventions at the University of Vermont in the USA. So I actually invited her to mark my PhD candidate, Dr. Melinda Hutchison's thesis. And then following that, again, she came to visit us on an international visiting fellowship. It was actually a Fulbright fellowship, which is a scheme specifically for Australia-USA collaborations. And when she was here, we started some other work, and she's now been involved in other systematic reviews, which is how we've kept that relationship going. In terms of other intentional collaborations, rather than just go to a conference hoping to meet someone who's an expert in the area, you can email them beforehand and arrange a specific meeting at that. If that ISBNPA, for example, is in their country, or their country's on the way to ISBNPA, you may be able to visit them en route and offer to give a seminar. Once you know them, you could apply for a visiting fellowship to visit them, or bring one of their team members to visit you. And again, that will depend a bit on what types of visiting fellowships your institution or their institution has. So here's another example of how I actually did that. At ISBNPA in 2013, I met Dr. Klaasien van der Horst, who'd done her PhD at ETH Zurich, which is ranked 9 in the Times Higher Education World Rankings. And we were chatting, and I was telling her about the type of research that we did, and that, you know, essentially we're always on the lookout for postdocs. She introduced me to her PhD candidate, Dr. Tamara Buka. Over the next 18 months, we developed up immediately a postdoc grant application that wasn't successful, and that was using Swiss Nutrition Foundation funding. We got really good feedback, and we applied again in 2014, and she came in and joined our team at that stage. In 2015, we had visitors then, Michael Zegers and Christina Hartmann from her research team back home, and it's led to some collaborations on EU projects, master's candidates, and now we're investigating a concept of what's called a double PhD, where a candidate will spend half their time at ETH Zurich and half their time here, and we'll end up with a PhD from both of our institutions. So some of the other outcomes of that is we've developed new methods around the fake food buffet using Qualtrics. We have more capacity. They have more capacity back in ETH Zurich because we now share these postdoctoral students. And it's led to other collaborations for both teams through the collaborators we each had. And it's also increased the capacity of my team to take higher degree by research candidates. Okay, so there we go back to that initial definition about causing burns and setting fire and arising passions. So let's just check back in on how being strategic can do that. So for me, some of the other sparks have been was when I was a very early career researcher in 2005, I went to a higher degree by research best of the best presentation, and one of the very senior professors said to me, asked a question, and I said to him, the only way you can answer that is it would take a PhD. And he said, well, I'll put up the PhD scholarship if you can get the candidate. And that led to a whole series of work for me from 2006 on around nutrition for mothers and babies. In 2005, I got my first National Health and Medical Research Council grant here. And that's when Phil Morgan, many of you will know, who was an ECR at that time, that's when we began collaborating on a major grant with another university, the University of Wollongong and the University of Sydney, and we generated a PhD here, Tracy Burrows, in childhood obesity. The other spark type of research project that I have came from a presentation I gave on nutrition and chronic pain back in 2010 when there was a national meeting here in Newcastle University. And again, with those clinicians, I said, you cannot answer what you need to know unless you do a PhD on that topic. And we need the right candidate. And that one took a bit longer to happen. We got the right candidate and the right scholarship, and that's Catherine Brain's PhD that's underway here at the moment on nutrition and chronic pain. So if you want to set fire to something, you can certainly do that if the wiring's faulty. So in terms of addressing that, it's getting the right mix of expertise in your collaborations and not being scared to approach someone when there's something missing. And that might be ethics. You might be a physical activity researcher wanting to do lifestyle interventions, but you haven't got a nutrition researcher, or vice versa. So check the wiring on your team and look for what's missing, and then be strategic in inviting and get that faulty wiring sorted out. Making sure you don't ignite the wrong kind of fire means about knowing and following the rules. So that's around the ethics for your project and financial management. It may mean people in your team need to do specific types of safety training or methodological training and use the services offered at your university. And it might mean getting on the right internal email list, such as a research list or an ethics newsletter, for example. My PhD supervisor taught me this one. The first time I got a letter to the editor when I was still a PhD candidate that was really, really mean and criticising something in my PhD, he snatched it out of my hand, and because I was really upset about it, and said, "Give that to me. I'll be addressing that. You don't get mad, you get even." And so he led the letter back to the editor. And what I learned from that experience was that a letter back to the editor is a chance to cite yourself. So you can cite yourself, and you can bring in a couple of your other papers in that letter to the editor and address the criticism. And it's very, very important, particularly if that's was not an appropriate type of criticism. And I had the same experience then with one of my PhD students who was very upset about a letter to the editor on one of her papers, and we did the same thing. We wrote back and we went, I'll see you on that citation of yourself, and we're going to cite a couple of our other papers in our response. So don't see it as a threat, see it as an opportunity. And you need to persevere until you get the results you want, and then use Twitter as a way of tweeting about your success in terms of grant opportunities. And that's just a little example of a great project that we got funded earlier this year. Okay, so news reports stir up controversy all of the time, but again, using Twitter, you can use a bad news report to promote a quality review that you've done. Or when you see what's controversial on Twitter, you can use that to generate some ideas. I think it's very important that you promote your research via the media. You'll see that IJBNPA regularly tweets people's papers, so retweeting those is really helpful. Within your own institution, you may have a paper that's very worthy of a media release, so don't be scared. Go and talk to the media team and do a media release on your paper. Disseminating your research and promoting your work, actually, it's not only about promoting you, it's promoting your team, it's promoting your university department, it's promoting your university, and it's actually promoting your country. Another thing there may be an opportunity for is writing a policy brief to inform government. And I think that's something you need to do, professional development around before you try doing the policy brief, because you want to make sure you're doing it the right way. So how do you make that wet tinder ignite when you keep getting knockbacks? Well, I think what you do is you just keep piling up the evidence or the outcomes, and eventually you'll get a sunny patch where all those twigs dry out, and eventually it will take off. So at that stage, the piling up of the dry twigs is doing good science. Just keep doing good science, whatever level you're at. Eventually, it will take off. When there's no appetite for your research, you just have to be resilient, and that's the key issue. So one of the things for me is that in Australia, maybe in the world, people aren't particularly interested in what people eat, but that is starting to change. And, when I first started my research career, people weren't even bothering to measure diet because they said it's so inaccurate and so boring that there's no point, it's a waste of money. So we took the opposite approach and developed a food frequency questionnaire and spent the last 12, 13 years doing validation studies using biomarkers so that we could characterize the error, creating a brief tool, making it free. That's the healthy eating quiz. And now we've gone on to put our food frequency questionnaire online, and we're only the second group in the world who've actually generated real-time feedback on dietary intake. So now we're at the point where we can include dietary assessment in all of our interventions save a lot of money and do it in a very standardized way. And we actually now sell this resource to other researchers. So don't be discouraged when nobody's interested in your research. If it's genuine and good, that tinder will be stockpiled for the future. So in summary, what I would say is big things take off with the strike of one single match. New Year's Eve, have you ever seen this image of the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Sydney Opera House? A single match gets that going on New Year's Eve every year. So hang in there, persevere, and you will eventually become successful. Thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Claire, for this very nice and interesting presentation. I think we had a few questions. Do we have still time? Yes, we have a few minutes left. Let me see. We have a first one from Antonio. Can you give some insight when you are an early career researcher and when you are a mid-career researcher?
I think that definition probably varies by country. And one of the things I found hard, Antonio, was that I was an early career researcher, but because of my age, and once I started becoming successful, people assumed that I was a mid-career researcher. So I had kind of the opposite problem. But what's interesting is that some people in Australia really are a mid-career researcher, but technically they're still applying for one of our early career researcher schemes, because in that they have junior early career, which is up to 7 years postdoc, I think. And then they have senior early career, which is up to 12 years postdoc. But they're still kind of considered in that, you know, early to mid-career, I suppose, scheme. So I think it's a bit of a blur, really. And you're probably judged more based on the outcomes rather than by years. So the bottom line is always read the funding rules around any scheme that you're actually applying for.
Okay, yes. And there's another question of Sophie. I think a big message of your presentation is that writing papers is very important. But can you tell something about the amount of papers we should write, like how many papers approximately a year, or the quality of the journal? Or can you tell us something about that? How did you do that yourself?
Well, in Australia, like again, that goes on fashion. So in Australia, we've gone where the journals, the impact factor was all that mattered. And now we're in a stage where it's more about the volume of papers that matters. So I think if you're doing good science and looking for the journal that best fits the publication. Having said that, I think there's times when you've got something that, you know it's your second best science, shall we say. It's not going to be a massively high impact factor. Then looking for a journal, any journal where you can get it published. And sometimes, I think you can even take a risk. So I'll give you an example of when I took a risk. A new journal started and it was called Nutrients. And I looked at the editorial board and I thought, this journal I'm going to take a risk in publishing this because I think this journal is going to really take off. And now it's got an impact factor of 3.6 or something like that. And so that one's really taken off. And some of those journals we've used, we just got to get this paper published. The PhD candidate's doing a thesis by publication. They've got a couple of good papers, but this small one. So we need to find a journal. Sure, it doesn't have a very high impact factor, or it's a new journal and it must just get published. So I would say horses for courses. So it's being strategic. Now, another strategic thing you can do, and this is probably more for the mid-career researchers, is we have, in my team, we have volunteered to guest edit special issues of journals. And it depends on the journal that is. Now, that is heaps of fun because you can then invite the key leaders in your field to guest edit with you. And then you get to invite all the people on your theme. You get like 5 free publications usually. So you just made 5 new friends because you can invite 5 free publications. But even more exciting than that, you get a whole bunch of really good papers on a specific topic, all in the one journal, and they get more cites because somebody finds one and they go, wow, look at all these other papers. So that's another thing you can do.
Great. I think that's all very good suggestions. Having a look at the time, it's almost 10, well, at least in Amsterdam. Well, on behalf of the NESI committee and of ISBNPA, Claire, I would really like to thank you for this very, well, I got very excited presentation on post-academic PhD career. I think also want to thank you on behalf of all the participants who were here. We were a group of 26 or 28. We were from all around the world. So I think it's very nice to be involved in this way. And I hope everybody got inspired. I think we did. And for a final time, thank you very much for being with us. And I hope to see you in Canada next year on the annual conference.
Thanks for the invitation, and I look forward to seeing you all in Canada. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.